What's up, everybody? This is going to be the first official build with the PSE NTN. By request, the first production bow has the serial number Rogan 001 because through this whole process, I told Joe that if he wanted it, he could have the first one off the presses. So right here is the first official unboxing of a production NTN. So we've got Rogan 001 right here. This is for my man, the guy that arguably has done more for bow hunting than any celebrity face out there. He doesn't like being called a celebrity, but I'm going to do it. But this is awesome. This is obviously super cool to be affiliated with having your name with a bow, but this is a bow that I'm really excited about. And I thought it'd be cool to do the first official setup with all of you in a semi-produced run here. So I'm just going to show you exactly what I would do if Rogan was a customer coming into my shop. How would I set this up? How would I do everything start to finish? And we're just going to do one complete run through for this video. So this is should be a bow that's we're going to want to get at his draw length, so right at 28.5 inches, 80 pounds, and we're going to mount up accessories. We're going to mount a knock-on elevate rest, and I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. He's going to be one of the first to get one of the new Rogans stabilizers that are ready to hit the market any day by request. He's putting a Spot Hog Fast Eddy on there with the extension bar, and I'm going to tune this thing up with those accessories, get it shot through paper. I've got an arrow over there that's got Rogan's name on it, which for all of his builds, he's using the same exact arrow that I've made for him for a long time. But these bows are pretty much ready to rock out of the box. The first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and set these modules to his draw length, which to start, and I'm going to fine tune this, but just to start, I'm going to set this in an H position. Right now it's in an F position, but I'm going to slightly adjust it. I'm also going to let him use the high let off setting for now just to see how he likes that. If he wants a little bit more holding weight, we can adjust that later, but we're easily able to adjust these two screws. Going to move it to that H position right there. I'll double check all this on the draw board once we're going, but I do know I would just want to get it close, and I'll fine tune it on the board later. But whenever I'm setting up a bow, the first thing I do is I'll go ahead and set the poundage first, which in this case I'm not going to have to because Joe's going to shoot this sucker bottomed out. I can guarantee you that. He wants everything it's got. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it bottomed out. But after I would adjust the poundage, then I would adjust the draw length, just because if you back your limb bolts out, you'll actually gain draw length. Or if you start out with a bow where the limbs are already backed out and you start to tighten them back in, you'll actually shorten the draw length a little bit. So if I'm working on a customer's bow, I would personally set that draw length first and then adjust those modules to where the draw length is accurate. Because say you have a customer that had an 80-pound bow like this, but he only wanted to shoot 70 for a while. By the time you backed it down to 70, that bow might draw, you know, 3/8 or a ½ inch long. So you might want to actually set it just a little bit shorter in those module settings just so the draw length is exact. But for right now, I'm just going to get it close. Like I said, I know Joe is going to shoot this thing bottomed out. From there, I'm going to go ahead and unpackage the rest and show you my process for this. Moving forward, for the PSE dealers specifically, there's going to be a package of the Elevate rests. It's going to be much more specific for the PSE bows, and they're going to come preset to my desired center shot, so you have a really good starting point. But one of the first things I personally do is I'm going to remove the steel cable that comes with it. The steel cable is a great option, but if you do a lot of moving with your rests, the more you tighten down on that steel cable and let off and tighten down and let off, you'll start to bite into that, and you may get some slippage if you're moving a lot. So I'm going to start out with a D-loop cord, and once we have everything where we want, then you have the option to go back to that steel cable or stick with the D-loop cord. One of the sweet things about this model is that we've got this direct drive cable connecting piece right here, so we're able to bring our rest right down into here. These are actually drilled out and they're cleaned up, so you don't have to worry about any rough edges in there for this, but it works really, really simple. Another thing I really like to do when I take these out of the package, for me personally, is I'll go ahead and just tighten down these screws just to make sure during shipping and transit none of these have came loose. Mainly I focus on the top screw right here, which is the left or right adjustment, and then I'll focus on this vertical adjustment screw. Like right there, you could see I was able to give, you know, probably 100 degrees on that. So you really want to tighten those things down. The other thing is on these PSEs, I made a change on the NTN riser to have a DT riser mount, so a dual tapped riser mount, which you can see here. So instead of having this secondary one that just bites down onto the riser, you actually have two positive locking screws on there. So if you have one of the PSE kits, you'll have two of those screws, which I've got right here. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to mount that the front screw first. So the single hole right here, you're going to put that through there, and you're going to mount that first screw as your very first one. You can finger tighten that down. And then once you finger tighten that one down, then you can put this secondary one in, which is going to go in the rear part of that rest mounting block. So we'll go ahead and put in the rear one, and we can tighten both of these down. I personally like to tighten both of them down just a little bit at a time, and you'll want to make sure that that rest is perfectly square. So bringing this up, I kind of snug down that rear hole. You do have a little bit of play in the front, which is great by design because you can eyeball it and get that exactly square depending on how your riser shape is. For this particular bow, it's going to mount up really, really true, and we're going to go ahead and tighten down both of those all the way, just like that. Now the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just eyeball this center shot. I know by looking at this, we're going to need to be a little bit further outside. And so for your gang adjustment for your left and right, I'm going to do that with these main two screws right here, which secure your launcher block to your rest post. So I'm going to move this out a little bit more. And if you're a person that utilizes a laser, or if you want to put an arrow on there and look down it, that's fine. I'm going to grab Joe's arrow, which should be right here. There's one of them. So I can put that on there, and I'm going to just eyeball it down the back. What I'm doing is I'm aligning the string with these cutouts that are in the riser, both above and below. And if you eyeball it to where you're running your string down these center lines of the riser and then reference your arrow shaft, you're going to see where your arrow shaft runs in relation to that. If you get it all running true down the pipe out of the get-go, that is a super awesome starting point. So we are just about to that position now. I'm going to move it just a little bit more left, right there. Give it one more look. That's a little bit too much. All right. Now you do have the option for micro adjustment here, but I like to do the gang adjustment on this main mounting block right here. So I'm going to tighten both these down securely. The other thing is these screws, as well as your main screw to hold your whale tail, they should have a Loctite on there. So just double check that they are fully locked down. Again, you don't know how much transit these have had. And then I'll also go ahead and just double check that whale tail screw right there as well. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get this pre-cut piece of leather right here, and I'm going to line the inside of this riser with that. I'm going to make a little bit of a trim to this. I'll be back. See how fast that was? So I'm trimming this out a little bit. Now we are working to include these pre-cut pieces, but what's nice about this, I'm trying to line it up while looking at the camera as well, but these pre-cut pieces allow you to still have the contour of your front indention that's been machined into the riser as a natural cradle for that rest, but you also have a little bit of silencing protection. But more importantly, on any type of limb driven style rest that is being driven down to the back of the riser, it's really important that you make sure that you always have some type of a cushion on the back of that riser as that rest is coming down. So I'm looking at that rest is coming down, it's stopping right there, but one of the things you'll notice is that out of the package, a lot of times when I'm touching right here, you'll see there's a gap between the cage and that whale tail. There's a small gap right there. And you'll want to make sure you adjust this cage to remove that gap, because you really want to have two different points of contact when that whale tail is being driven down at the shot. You don't want it to hit only the front and being bending down like this. You want that support in the middle of that rest. So in your package, you do have a long Allen screw like this so that you can adjust that cage. Whether or not you adjust it now or later, that's up to you, but make sure you do that every single time. And like I said, I'll go ahead and push this down to where the whale tail is flat on the back of the riser, and I'll push this cage up so that when I tighten it down, there's now no gap between the center part of that whale tail and the front. So I'm going to go ahead and tighten this down. Both these screws. I'm going to lower this down. Okay, and you can see I'm touching on the cage at the same time that I'm touching the front of the pad. You can see there 2 points of contact when it's coming down and touching, which is really good. Now another thing I personally do is, for some hunters out there, I know there's like extreme paranoia about sound. In a lot of cases I understand, but there's also cases where me and all of my hunting experiences, I've also not had problems with certain things. So one of the things I personally do on our rest is I actually remove this silencer piece that's on this post right here. There's a small rubber tube that you can see, which is there to silence this rest if it happened to come up really fast. It silences it. If you remove that tube, then it'll actually be metal on metal, but it is so minor, I've never had a problem with it at all. And one of the things that I like about removing that is it allows the whale tail to come up just a little bit more, which is my personal preference. The other thing is, over time, if this thing's coming up thousands and thousands of times, it will start to compress that silicone, and so it will slowly start to rise. I mean, we're talking a millimeter at the most, but there is a possibility of that, or it can slide off later. So a lot of hunters wanted that on there as a silencing piece. I personally have never had a problem not having it. So I'm telling you exactly how I set everything up. So you can see here from an arrow rest point of view, we're in pretty darn good shape. From this point here, what I'd like to do is go ahead and draw this back, double check the draw length. And once I double check that, we're gonna be able to decide really whether we wanna mount the other accessories, which I personally don't at this time, just because I like to tie my nocks, loops, peep sight. I like to get all that in without having the other accessories in the way as I'm working on the bow. That's really up to the user and preference. But we're gonna go ahead and check this draw length. Now me personally, I've got a small little D-loop piece like this that you can see that I can loop around the string just like this, so that if I don't have tied knocking points, I don't have to worry about what I actually hook this wench to. So I'm gonna just put this in a center point where it's easy to pull. The other thing that's nice about this is it seems to put way less pressure on that center serving, so you don't have to worry about center serving slippage. But I'm gonna mount this hook right in there. I'm gonna adjust this down just so it pulls level and easier. Now I'm checking two things here. One, I'm checking draw length. So you can see right here is Joe Rogan. That's his draw length. Here's what is here's where he'll be at the back of the loop. So I'm a fuzz long here, actually. I'm just a little bit long, which I honestly like to start out with because I know I'm gonna add twists to get the peep rotation correctly. And when I add twists to the string, I'll shorten the draw length a little bit. So based on this, 1/8 inch at most long, I'll be able to shorten that up by putting 3 or 4 twists in. The other thing I'm looking at is timing. So I'm just checking cam synchronization, which every PSE I've pulled out of the box has been unreal with this Evolve cam system. They've all came in feeling awesome, and if you watched the PSE factory tour that I put on Instagram, you'll have seen that they actually check the synchronization. They really do a good job of checking exact poundage, and the draw length right from the factory based on what you order. So this thing at this point is ready for me to take over to the bow press. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to get an arrow and set it up for nock height. Now, one thing I want to say is you should really pay attention to what type of nock you're going to be using, because some nocks do have different thicknesses. So I know personally Joe only shoots with the nocturnal lighted nocks, and so I'm going to come over here and I'm going to grab one of the ones that he's using, put it in there. You can tell I've used this arrow a lot. I'm going to put it in there, so when I set my nock height for these D-loops, I'm going to have the correct nock thickness in order to make this work. So let's head over to the press. All right, here at my bow press, one of the things that I keep there is I always keep a small brass nock. And I do that for temporary nock points, because depending on how you like your nock fit, so I really like a nock fit to where when I clip this nock on the string, you hear that positive click, but I also like to be able to rotate that serving within that nock. So you can see I can spin it. So as I pull back, if you do have any type of string turn at all, it's not wanting to turn the arrow left or right. So because there is a little bit of play up and down, sometimes it's really hard to find your nock height and tie it on without having it slip. So by having a little brass nock over here, I'll put that brass nock on my string, and I'll put it first, I'll put it under the nock, and I'm going to adjust it so that I'm right at 90 degrees. So right there, just eyeballing it, looking at it, I'm at 90 degrees. So from that position, it'll kind of hold the spot that I need for right now. So if you're tying nocks or D-loops, you really don't have to have your bow fully pressed, but you definitely want to have it secured down. So I'm going to adjust this a little bit here, just so we're fully secured down. That really helps when you're doing D-loops, tied nocks. I'll even bring these limb holders up as well, just so that I have a little bit more security on the riser. Now you don't want to press it so that your string has slack in it, but you do want to at least have enough on there to where when you're pulling on this and tying these nocks and D-loops, you're not sliding all over the place. Now, one thing I will say, if you do want to have some type of a silencer on your arrow rest, which I personally haven't had any problem drawing back with the rest that comes on these. I've never had a silencing material on an Elevate rest for any of the kills I've ever made. So if you choose to do that, one of the things that I really recommend for a material that can really go on there tight and pinch down really nice and lay flat and have a very slick surface but stick really well and wear really well is actually Gorilla Tape. You can cut small little pieces, put them on the inside of those fins, works awesome. If you're going to have any type of silencing material on your arrow rest, make sure you put it on there first before you set your nocking height. Otherwise, if you get your nocking height set now and then you add something that's thicker onto that arrow rest later, then you're going to have an issue. And that's one of the reasons why I personally am not a huge fan of putting thick silencing material onto my arrow rest surface, is because as you wear through that, your arrow is just going to go deeper and deeper and deeper and down in that trough, and you're just going to continually hit lower and lower and lower over time and over repetition. So I personally have just said, if you can manage how you draw your bow, which I think is important as a bow hunter, then you probably don't even need to really worry about that. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and tie my top knocking point. And for that, I am going to use right here some BCY 3D material. This is my favorite material for tied knocking points and peeps. I guess your color choice is yours. We do have black and we also have green at knockonarchery.com. But we're going to tie that top knocking point first, and then we'll double check that knock height after that, and we'll then know whether or not we're ready to go ahead and tie the bottom one, or if for some reason we've made a mistake and when that knocking position has changed, we can decide whether we remove it and start over. But just to give you a quick look at how I recommend tying knock sets is I'll start underneath first, meaning I bring my material underneath, and this is probably 1.5 feet long. Then what I'll do is I'm going to wrap this 2 times around like this. That way, as I tie this down, it forms a knot halfway around the string. And then when I make my next tie, and the same thing, it'll form a tie halfway around on the bottom. So it'll be halfway around on the top, halfway around on the bottom. But again, just wrap twice and pull it down. Now once I kind of snug it down a little bit like that, it's kind of hard to butt it up perfectly against that knock. But if you just hold tension on that and rotate it clockwise, it'll start to turn and tighten down a little bit closer to that knock for you, just based on the direction of that center serving. So I'm going to snug down that first one, and you can see I rotated that down to the bottom when I snugged it in. So now I'm going to go back to the top again. So the opposite side, I'm going to wrap twice, and I'm going to pull this down, butt it up against that first tie, and I'm going to kind of pull that tie down just a little bit tighter against that knock, and then cinch it in just like that. And you can see that I've now created a perfectly symmetrical tied knocking point. Now, one of the things that you're going to need to learn as you do this is this material is twisted. It's 3D, so it's 3 different strands, and you can see they're spun together. So they want to spin a certain direction because they've been trained that way. So as you're making these ties, if you're not allowing that natural twist to get out of that, then what's going to happen is you're going to start to have these little kinks within your knock sets, and your knock sets aren't going to be uniform like that. It's a lot like if you have a garden hose that's perfectly wound around a spool, and then you unspool it, and you try to just wind it around your arm, eventually you get this big kink in the end, or it starts to knot up on you. So by letting those twists freely go out the end of that, you're going to have a much, much cleaner and much better tied knocking point. So as I'm pulling this up, you can see I also lightly pull these ends and let those twists go out of the ends. I'm tightening it down. And the other thing is, as I'm making these twists right here, I'm not forcing this thing in a direction it doesn't want to go. I'm just laying it on itself and just looping it through without adding any extra twists. And that way, when I pull it down and cinch it and I go like this, I'm allowing those extra twists to spin out. So at this point, I've done 3 stacks on the top, and that's my 3rd stack on the bottom. So that is going to be the last time that I do the double tie. Now to finish this, I'm going to do a single tie, but on the single tie, I'm going to go between the last two ties. So I've got a layer, I've got a layer, and I've got a layer. Now this time when I tie off my last time, I'm going to go between that second and third layer. So, and I'm going to tie a square knot. I'm not going to go around twice. So I'm going to go around one single time. So there's one time. And now as I tighten this down, I'm going to tighten this down right in between the second and third layer. So you can see I'm going in there right now. I'm going to pull this tight, and you can see it just sandwiched everything even tighter together. And now I'm going to go ahead and finish just with a single tie one more time, which creates a square knot, and that completes your tied knocking points. Now from there I can slide this out of the way, and since we finished with this on the top, a fundamental is flames always go up, so don't try to burn underneath your string. Instead, have your fire, go ahead and burn on this and let your heat melt that down to a ball. You don't have to inflame the whole string. Just let the radiant heat off that lighter. It'll be enough to get that melting down in there. Go ahead and smash that melted string into itself, and you can see we have a perfectly symmetrical tied knocking point that's uniform all the way around, and it's also super clean. It's not gobbed on top of itself. It doesn't have spacing in between there, so over time it's not going to compress or change. It works out really, really well. And once you get that top one done, then you can take this out of the press and you can just double check on whether or not your effort was correct, or if somehow in the process of all that it slipped. So right now I'm looking, I'm still at 90 degrees, so I'm totally happy with where I'm at. This is easy for me to remove this temporary brass knock off, and I can now tie my bottom knock if I'd like to. Now, one of the things that I really like to do before I tie that bottom knock, or even especially before I tie my loop set, is I'm going to go ahead and put the peep in this string, and I'm also going to adjust the twist of the string so the peep is facing directly back towards me and has proper peep rotation before I finish tying those other knocks. That's a step that I think can really help people with not having your D-loop facing the wrong way, or having your D-loop come loose, or having to change your knocking points so much that you end up separating that center serving underneath. So I'm going to grab a peep sight and we're going to get that installed. Got a peep sight. A lot of people ask me, what kind of peep sight do you use? I don't know. I just have a whole box of them. I just tell Lancaster, send me every 3/16 peep you have. And so I just get a whole bunch of them. Some work good, some don't. Hopefully Joe's works good. If not, it's your fault. All right, so on this bow, we're going to press it. We're going to, the center of the string's marked. You always want to make sure you use the true center of your string. Otherwise, you're going to be balancing stability issues. One thing I will say is, and I can say this without question because I've been shooting these bows for months and months and months, is these live wires that PSE makes are the best factory bowstring I've ever shot, period. See, hear that right now? That's other bowstrings calling me because they're mad I just said that, but it's true. These are great strings. Knock-on strings aren't ready yet, so Joe, you're getting live wires, which is a pretty sweet Motley Crue song. I'd probably be playing that right now on my vinyl, but every time I do bow builds to my records, I end up getting in licensing trouble. So I'm gonna set Joe's peep height, beep, 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 beep. And I measure from the top of the knock to the center of the peep. So I'm gonna go ahead and set that height. I can tell right now, I'll get this arrow off, but I can tell right now that when there's tension on this string, this peep is going to be facing at about 9 o'clock. And you really want a string that allows your peep to be facing straight back to you. So every full revolution that you add to the string, you're going to change about, from 9 o'clock, you're going to go to about 12 o'clock. So I'm going to add 1 turn onto this. Now this is one of the things that was a little bit tough for me to get used to with PSEs, if I'm totally honest, which I like to be honest. It's not a problem. It was just when people say, what do you like about the PSE or what don't you like? I'm not going to say I don't like it, but it's different. I'm used to every other bow I've ever worked on, the string is always connected on my side of the cam. So to work on the other side of the cam is a little bit awkward for me, but I'm going to go ahead and add 1 full turn to this string. So there's 1 full revolution, and you can see now when I put tension, if I pull on this tight, you can see where that peep is. Okay, now stay on the peep, Caleb, and I'm going to take that turn, full turn out. So I'm going to remove that full turn. There's a full turn out. So you can see that peep's facing at 9 o'clock, which is where we started. I'm going to add 1 full turn in, and we're going to go ahead and see where we end up with that as the starting point. So one thing I know from experience is it's going to take a certain amount of shots to settle a string, even a really good made string. The better the string, the less it's going to take. But what I will say is I feel like if I've added one twist, that's less than I anticipated when I was setting the draw length, so I may adjust that draw length a little bit later. But what I will say is I do always like to add twists rather than take twists away, because when that string's made and it's twisted down to the length and then it's served, if it's built properly, you don't want to remove twists out because you'll also start to loosen those fibers as well. When they're twisted together, they really embody in themselves and they make a much, much more stable string as it's going through the air. So by flattening it out, those fibers can spread apart. So you do want to keep those twists in there. And I always add twists more than take twists away. So I'm going to go ahead and double check these tracks. I always double check. I take my finger and I literally put it on where I hook a string or a cable on, and I'll follow that all the way around the cam and make sure I'm in this track. If I'm out of a track somewhere, let's just say I was out right here and I followed this, I would feel that it's out of that track right there. So you want to have it in the track. You want to follow your finger all the way around on that string, and even right here I'm hooking it up over. Okay, now I'm in, and you can hold that tension and then go ahead and double check your cables just the same. I'm going to let that pressure off, and you can see my peep is pretty much facing right back to me. It'll settle just a little bit once I tie it in, but for the most part we're set to go. I'm not going to worry about tying this in right now. I'm more worried about now I'm able to finish my knock sets. So I'm going to put that arrow back in there just so that now I can tie my other knocking points. So I'm going to get 3D material, get about 1.5 feet, burn it off. And again, I'm going to start underneath. I'm going to wrap that twice, pull it down, get those twists out of there, and I'm going to butt this up tight. And I'm going to cinch that down. Then I'm going to wrap it twice again underneath. I'm going to butt that up perfectly against that bottom one, cinch it down. And now once I've cinched that down, and that's pretty tight, and I went tight against the knock at first, I just move this knock a little bit so that I can create just enough space there to where I don't have too much knock pinch at full draw. Now that really varies a lot depending on the axle to axle length of your bow, how far you draw the bow back. You know, the further you pull a bow back, that triangle gets sharper and sharper and sharper, whereas with Joe, he has a fairly short draw length, and with this 33-inch bow, he's going to have a nice string angle, so he's not going to have much pinch at all. So as long as I can have a little bit of movement and I can wiggle that just a little bit right there, I'm totally fine with that. And I'm going to go ahead and continue to stack these tied knocking points. So that's 2 on the top, 2 on the bottom. Continue to stack, making sure there's no gaps, making sure there's no overlaps, letting all that twist out. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add one more column on the bottom than what I did on the top. And I do that, so I've added one more column on the bottom, and now we're right back to, I added one more column and I tied my bottom one. Now to finish on my top one, I'm going to go ahead and pull this last one down between that 3rd and 4th column. So I'm literally going to take this, I'm going to wrap it 1 time, not 2 times, and I'm going to pull this down tight right in between that 3rd and 4th column. I'm going to pinch it down, and then I'll tie one more time again to complete that square knot. And I'll burn that down. So you can see I have a little bit of space, not a lot, because again the draw length is fairly short, so I don't need gap. If I have too much gap at that shorter draw length, you'd still be able to move that arrow up and down, and I don't want that. I want it to hold it, I just don't want it to pinch it. So the reason I put a little bit, or I should say one more row of a tied, I guess a tied row, the reason why I put one more underneath is because I like a little bit thicker knocking point on the bottom than on the top. I'm a huge advocate of having 2 tied knocking points, because if you go to replace your D-loop, which you're definitely going to if you have any type of repetition, a D-loop is meant to wear. It's going to wear as you're shooting. And when you remove that D-loop, or if you ever want to change your draw length, a 1/4 inch or an 1/8 inch, do it with the D-loop. Don't do it with the draw length of the bow. Keep your speed of the bow and everything the same, and your pin gaps the same. Keep all that's the same. Just adjust that fine tuning with your D-loop. And by having two tied knocking points, you can do that without losing that vertical adjustment that we just worked so hard to get. So now the next thing we're going to do is tie a D-loop on here. And for that, you can really choose the type of material that you want. I'm going to just go ahead and use a black, but this is a poly cord. We also have this at knockonarchery.com, and this has a coating on it as well. So it has a special coating on it, so it's a little bit shinier. It's a little bit stiffer. You can see it holds shape. The ones that don't have coating, which can't really pull one off right now, but the ones that don't have coating, it'll be much more limber. It'll fray sooner. It's not my preference. So I'm going to go ahead and tie this D-loop. It's really captain's choice whether or not you want to tie a D-loop or tie a peep sight in. But to start your D-loop, all you need to do is take your D-loop material, which I'm a huge proponent of having a D-loop that you tie from scratch, not one that is pre-burnt and pre-cut to an exact length to where you just loop it through and reef on it. I'm a big proponent of pulling tight on every single aspect of that loop as we make it. So I normally start with 6 to 8 inches of loop material just so I have enough to pull on. And the first thing that I do is I'll take that D-loop material for a right-handed shooter, and I'll go ahead and make a small J with it, just like this. Okay, so we've got our J. We're going to put it on our side of the string to start with. And I do this for a particular reason, because when we tie D-loops, we want to make sure that that D-loop on the top is on our side of the string, but then as we go to the bottom side of the nocking point, it's on the other side of the string. And that's because when you do that, it creates this natural turn in your D-loop, just like that. And if you imagine grabbing this with a release aid, and the position that you'll be in at full draw, which is going to look just like this, when your hand's in this position, you can see that you're not actually putting much torque on your string because you've already set that D-loop up to be in that position. Whereas if we're opposite of that, or if you're on both sides of the string and you're turning, you're putting a lot more tension and twist in that D-loop. So just to go back a little bit, we're going to go ahead once again, we're going to make that J shape. We're going to lay it against the string. We're going to flip the bottom side of that loop around the back side of the string and feed both of those ends through just like that. And you're going to take as much of that slack out as you can by pulling on your long end, which is why I like it long, so that you have the ability to pull that slack out. And then also go ahead and squish this down with your pliers so that you're making this back here much smaller as well. Because if there's a gap in there like that, that gap over time just, it slowly starts to work itself out. It'll start to squish down. It can start to separate your serving. So by getting all this out now is really, really helpful, but it's also important. So I'm going to squish that down. You can see I've got this small end underneath the longer end. I've squished it down, and I'm going to grab that small end really close to that knot, just like this. And when I pinch down on it, I'm just going to roll it and let leverage pull that slack out of that small side, which if you use a pre-cut D-loop, you would never get that slack out. And again, I'm pinching this down, pulling as much slack out as I can. And once I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and clip this off. about a 1/4 inch left, 1/8 to a 1/4 inch left. And I'm going to fuzz up this end I just cut off without taking any of the tension out of that knot that I just created. So I'm going to fuzz that up. Again, flames go up, so grab your string and rotate it a little bit so that you can use that radiant heat and melt your cut end, but not the end that you didn't cut. You want to make sure you don't burn the D-loop where you're going to be pulling on it. Okay, so now I'm going to take my hand, I'm going to pull on that as tight as I can, and I'm going to finish this D-loop by going over to the back side of the string. So on the other side, you can see we're on this side of the string here, we're on the other side of the string there. I'm going to come towards you and loop it through. I'm going to pull this to where there's maybe about a 1/2 inch at the most in between there, because a lot of that slack is we're gonna be able to pull some of that slack out and stretch that out later. So I went under towards us, I looped it through. I'm gonna turn it back over the top of the string, loop it under again, and pull it through. So you can see there. Again, I'm gonna pinch this tight, grab it close, and kind of just twist these pliers and let the leverage pull that slack out. Pinch it close. All right, you can see there's no gap back here. This is tight. You can see there's equal tension on the right side, left side, no slack. We're on this side of the string here. You can see that D-loop has already got a natural turn to it. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to cut this off. Go ahead and grab your whole string and roll this to where you can fuzz that D-loop up just like this. You're kind of trying to undo all that braiding and expose that white polyester core. And then we're going to go ahead and burn this all the way down. Let it cool down. Smash it flat just like that so you have a nice little ball. And your D-loop is tied how it needs to be. Now, before I cinch this D-loop down completely, I personally like to go ahead and tie my peep into position. Now for this, depending on what type of material they use to mark your center of your string, you may want to get some of that out of your way. For me, I'm going to get some of that out of my way. It's a little bit long. So I just do that. Okay. Now I am going to use 3D again. Got a little bit different material. Still 3D, just a little newer spool. Since I didn't know what I'd done with that one. It's right in front of my face. And for peeps, there's a lot of different ways to tie peeps. If I'm doing something personally, I like to do simple under and over knots. Single tie, overs and unders. I continually just stack them perfect. They look super clean. They look, if you do them right, they look like a perfectly tied noose, which looks kind of cool. So I'm going to just make one tie. One thing I want to tell you is When a peep is in a bowstring, it creates this split. Okay, so if you try to tie this up here and you tighten this down, as soon as you let off any tension, it spreads back apart. And these will only get loose by doing it that way. But if you come down here to where the V comes to its stop and you tie these here and you get them really tight, you can slide them up later and they'll really secure in a position. So I've tied it once. Now I'm going underneath to do a single tie, slide it up just a little bit so I'm at the base of that V. So we're just going to do over and unders. That right there is the 4th, 5th. I'm just going to go at a normal speed here for you guys. And if you slow this down, you can see that I'm actually letting, when I go like this, I'm letting these twists come back out of this, because again, by adding twists to this string, you create these spins and these double knots that really don't look good, and they create a looser knot overall. So I'm really trying to appreciate and continue to allow the natural twists of this string to do its thing. Now, of course, with talking while I'm tying, I've kind of lost my count. But for the most part, I normally do 20. You want to have enough ties to where this isn't going to slip. I'm going to go ahead and do one more. And to finish, you can see here, this is a really perfectly tied over and under. There's no gaps, no lap overs. And to finish, I always finish on the top of the string with that double tie that I talked to you about. So I'm going to tighten this last one in between the last 2 rows. Cinch it down right there in between those last 2 rows, and then I'll tie one more knot on top of that last one to create a square knot. And what's nice about this is when you finish this tie and you burn this down, you're not burning it down against the bottom of the string. That's why I don't finish on the bottom. I finish in between the last 2 rows. By finishing between those last 2 columns, when you burn that down, you're burning it down between the columns, and you're able to smash down that melted thread between the last 2 columns. And it works out really good. You don't have to worry about it loosening up over time. You also don't have to worry about it starting to come apart, and it just looks way cleaner. Now for this top one, I personally go around to the other side of the string, and I'm going to do the exact same thing I just did, but coming from the opposite side. If you do it from this way, you run the possibility of having that come loose. So I work to where I can push my knots, pull my knots, slide them forward, you know, rather than trying to pull them back into that V. I personally like to push them forward. So I'll do this one standing here, and then I'll go around to the opposite side of that string for that last tie. Got the peep tied on the top. Now we're gonna do one last thing that I think is imperative for everybody. This is 100% a safety protocol, and also one that's mandatory in some European countries, but you always want to make sure you tie your peep sight into the string. I'm going to go ahead now and loosen the string a little bit so that I can remove that string separator that was in there from the factory. And I'm going to tie this peep sight in. This is really important. Like I said, in some European countries for target archery, it's also mandatory that the peep is actually tied completely onto the string. Now there's a lot of different ways to tie peeps. I personally don't make a served tie to where I serve and then go around the peep and then continually serve, because I know over time I'm gonna have to add a twist to this string. And if I have to add a twist to the string, then that means I've got to remove that whole tie in order to get it back to center. If you do it this way, you have a top and bottom tied knock points that always secure the peep. But if you have to make revolutions and you do have to flip your peep around in the string, then you only have to remove this in order to do that. And your other ties are still intact. So what I do for this is I'll take, again, about a 1.5 foot piece of 3D material. I'll actually go ahead and make this tie here on top first, one single tie, just so I can see that it's correct, and then I'll slide it around to where it's on the bottom. I'll pull it tight. Now I'm going to come to the top of this peep, and I'm going to tie one full time. I'm going to pull up so the bottom's tight. I'm going to tie it as tight as I can, and then I'm going to put one more on top to finish, again, that square knot. Now what I like about this is a couple things. One, I can burn this down, and as I burn it and melt it, I'm melting it onto the peep site and not onto the string itself. So you can see right there, this is fully tied all the way around, but we also haven't burned a knot onto the string in any fashion, which is important. But the other thing that's awesome about it is, like I said, if this string over time starts to settle, the wax starts to squirt out, starts to elongate, if I need to add another twist or two to this string to get the peep rotation correct in the future, and I need to turn this peep 180 degrees in the string, which is very likely if you're a bow mechanic, you know this is possible. But what I like about this system is if I want to remove this, now I'm not having to cut close to my string for any of this. I can simply take my blade, I can go under that knot, and I'm against the peep site, and I can slowly start to cut that first piece, and I can remove this off without ever having to put an edge next to my string material. So again, do that first tie on the bottom, then do your second tie on the top, pull them both as tight as you can, and make sure you tie one more time to have that full square knot on the top. So we're tight there, pull this through, tight there. Okay, so now that we've done that, we can see my peeps where it needs to be. Honestly, we can remove our string tabs, and I'm pretty certain this string is going to be where it needs to be. So I'm going to go ahead and position my D-loop to where when I pull on this, the D-loop's coming straight back, the peep's facing straight back, and I'm going to remove any little bit of slack that's left in that D-loop, which it's going to be left in the center because that's the only part we haven't completely pulled on the tightest. So I can insert my D-loop pliers in here, and I can just spread this and tighten it up. Joe's D-loop is normally about 3/4 of an inch, so that's right where I'm going to here. Tightening that up so the D-loop's fully bit into the string, peeps tied in perfectly. This bow is ready to get the arrow rest positioned in a final position. We can also mount that sight. Once we're to this point, we're kind of definitely at the home run. So you can see this is looking really good. We'll come back over here, make a few adjustments. One of the adjustments that I'm going to make is I'm going to go ahead and loosen this string stopper here. You can see there's a little bit of a gap. Depending on what you do with your poundage, which I might double check that poundage, but if you change your poundage, that gap can change. So what I like to do, I'm going to have to get a different size, but I like to loosen that up and just lightly let that fall onto your string so that it's touching, but it's not pressing the string one way or another. You can adjust it to where it's center and go ahead and tighten that back up securely. And for your arrow rest, we know that we're at 90 degrees, so we're good to go there. What's awesome about this system here is we have a pre-cut piece of D-loop cord with a knot tied on the end. It's burned down. I'm not sure the length. I think it was 16 inches. Could be wrong. But we're going to feed this right through this hole that's on the outside of the riser. Obviously, there's two holes for right or left-hand shooter, but we're going to be on the outside of the riser. Going to feed that through. We can go right up through our arrow rest lever arm. Just like that. And without the dealer or the at-home bow mechanic having to tie anything into your cable to put a clamp on your limb, you're able to make this connection really easy. And what I really like about this system is it doesn't have near the overslap of a limb for a limb-driven system. So it's, you know, on some bows where the limbs are more forward, there's a lot of limb drive. So the rest is just smashing down harder and harder onto that shelf. This is a way less abrasive unit. So I'm going to go ahead and check my center shot one more time with that arrow before I pull this down and tighten it. But for the most part, we are totally set right now to just mount a sight. We're going to mount the stabilizer on here. I am going to walk you guys through what I do to level a sight. If he wants to use the quick stand sticks, these have been changed quite a bit since the very first prototype bow that we had at the ATA show, but you can see here that for the most part we are rocking and rolling. If that arrow rest was down, we'd be totally good to go. So hang tight. I'm going to double check that arrow, mount the sight. We'll be good to go. All right, I've got my sight mounted on a bright sight leveler, which is one of my personal favorites. But I've got this mounted in here, and I'm going to check second and third axis. Now, a lot of people choose to do this on the bow, and especially at full draw. Me personally, I feel like if you're torquing a bow to the point where you need to be checking this at full draw, there's a lot of other issues that are going to magnify that I think are going to become problematic as well. So I personally choose to do second, third axis from a static position. That's my personal choice, but more or less what we're looking for is, one, when the sight is on a perfectly level surface, we want to adjust the second axis, which is going to be this way, to where that level is going to be perfectly level with a level surface. Now, what's nice about this little bright sight unit is that you have the ability to adjust these dials to where you can adjust your up and down and also your left and right. So you can see here right now I can adjust this a little bit to where I've got this level right here, dead center. Then also I've got my level in the center, dead center. So I've adjusted that up and down to where we have the correct positioning. Now for your third axis, the third axis is, if you can imagine looking over the top of the sight, if you're looking over the top of the sight, if that sight or the level is not square to the plane of that arrow, then what happens is as you raise up, that level is going to show you one indication, and you're going to offset your bow in order to make up for that level and get it the bubble in the center. And then when you go to shoot downhill, it's going to give you an exact opposite reading, and so you're going to counter that by tilting your bow the opposite direction. So again, you can get that bubble in the center of your level. So by adjusting the third axis, which again, if you're looking over the top of the sight, you're going to be adjusting that so that that level is going to be square with, you know, your aeroplane. You're going to have a sight that's going to give you a perfect bubble indication whether you're shooting uphill or downhill. So for that, I've got, again, I've just adjusted my second axis. For that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen this up, and I'm going to move this sight up just like this, and I'm going to look at where that level's at. So I'm a little bit on the right side there, and you know, I'm going to adjust this to where I'm center. You can see inside there my bubble's a little bit off. So you can see that because my third axis this way is off, it's given me a false indication when I'm pointing it uphill. It's putting my bubble on this side, so I would tilt my top limb to the right, my right, if I was shooting uphill. And then when I was shooting downhill, so if I move this to where I was shooting it downhill, which I'll have to move it on the table, but if I'm shooting it downhill, and I'm a little bit close, but you can see here when I am level and I'm shooting downhill, now my bubble's on the left side of that level. So this is going to then cause me to tilt my bow the opposite direction. So what I really want to do is I want to adjust this sight so that whether I'm tilting up or tilting down, that bubble is staying perfectly center within that level on all those adjustments. Now, if you have a good high quality sight, you're going to have the ability to adjust second and third axis both. If you don't, then that's going to be a problem, because it's going to depend on how true and how square that bubble has been put into that sight from the factory. So I'm going to go ahead and make these adjustments on this particular sight here. There's adjustments that you can make here and here for your second axis. For your third axis, or adjusting it this way, are actually going to be these two screws here. All sights have a little bit different type of adjustment, but I'm going to make this adjustment quick and get it mounted on Joe's sight, or Joe's bow. Got the sight leveled. We're going to mount the sight block onto the riser. This stuff is about as self-explanatory as you can get. Grab Allen wrenches. Now, I normally choose to prefer to make a mark exactly on which hole that I'm putting this extension bar on. For this particular one, I'm going to start it right here. It's not all the way out. It's a little further out than what I like. Maybe bring it in a little bit more. You can adjust that depending on how your front sight matches your rear peep sight. Once you're at full draw, you might want to change that a little bit. But I'm going to go ahead and start with it right there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this rest cord, I'm going to move it up through this slot here, and I go ahead and use the Allen wrench kind of like a crowbar. So I'm going to pull the slack out of this cord, and as I pull the arrow rest down onto the riser using that Allen wrench, I'll remove the slack out of that cord and tighten this down. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this last end tab right here, and I'm just going to lay it over onto the other part of that rest cord, and I'm just going to do over and under knots right here, the exact same as what I did on the peep sight, just to tie this down. I do enough ties to where I have a nice clean finished look, but you also want to not have too many to where you can't slide this, because later on if you do want to loosen this up and reposition your rest, you can do that if you don't make these completely secure. So you can see here, with this knot, it looks clean, but it also can slide down or up if you need it to, but it just looks really, really clean. The only thing I didn't talk about, I'm just gonna, second camera. I'm gonna show you this right now. With those tied peep nocks, I just now thought about it, but we didn't slide them up to secure them in. And to do that, just get an old piece of D-loop material like this, wrap it around the string one time, take it to the bottom, and just press till you get that thing nice and tight. And then do the same thing on the top one, and it really tightens it into that V a little bit more. Gets that thing really secured in. But this is a sweet, sweet setup right here. This thing looks awesome. Let's go ahead and give it its first rip through paper. You can see arrow containment's working. It's nice and quiet with that leather. It's down in the trough. All right, let's see what this thing can do. 80 pounds, FMJ. Rogie is gonna like. That's it right there. That is gonna be a sweet, sweet beast. I'm gonna go ahead and double check the draw length. Obviously we got to sight this in. Then we're gonna hang it up, give it a name, peel all the little safety stickers off the decal so it looks so nice. And this baby is going to be ready for Joe to bust an elk with it. Pumped. Look at that. 80 pounds, 4-pound holding weight. 4 pounds. It's like holding a little baby. That's what it's like. But shoots like a full-blown raging silverback grizzly, which is a new breed of death animal. This microphone. There it is. It's a good day. Good day in the knock shop.